In a world once shaped by optimism, a new reality is beginning to take form. Old alliances shift, emerging powers rise, and the global order that defined the last century is fracturing before our eyes. Welcome to A Dark Dawn, a podcast dedicated to understanding this new geopolitical landscape. Here, we explore a world entering a colder, harsher chapter, a time when civilizations drift apart, when regions turn inward, and when a deepening rift shapes everything from global governance to the risk of conflict. From the growing divide between democratic and authoritarian blocs, to the struggle for influence across Eurasia, to the quiet structural forces pulling states toward new centers of power, we seek to explain not only what is happening, but why. This is the Dark Dawn, the emergence of a fragmented world where cooperation fades, enmity grows, and the future feels increasingly uncertain. Join us as we illuminate the shadows of this new era, one episode at a time. And this is episode 1 of A Dark Dawn. And tonight we trace how Russia used China from the mid-19th century to the present, and how that legacy shapes their uneasy partnership today. For more than 150 years, Russia has shaped its relationship with China on its own terms, from the final days of the Qing Empire to the rise of modern China. So, let's delve into our first episode, a journey into one of the most complex and uneasy relationships of the modern world, the long, troubled, and often opportunistic interaction between China and Russia. When people today wonder whether Russia and China are building a strategic partnership, it's worth looking at history and the skeletons in the closet. For more than 150 years, Russia, in the form of its empire, the Soviet Union, and even the modern state, has repeatedly acted in ways that weakened, restrained, or exploited China. According to classic great power logic, keep your neighbors weak, avoid a two-front war, and seize opportunities to expand when your neighbor is in chaos. This pattern began already in the 19th century, when China was close to collapsing under massive civil wars, while Britain and France attacked during the Opium Wars. In the middle of this, Russia offered help, but only if China signed the treaties of Aigun, 1858, and Peking, 1860. The result was that Russia took enormous territories larger than the entire United States east of the Mississippi. The pattern continued. After China's defeat to Japan in 1895, Russia, France, and Germany forced Japan to withdraw from the Liaodong Peninsula, only for Russia to seize the exact same territory shortly afterward, and when the Bolsheviks came to power, they promised in the famous Karakan Manifesto to return all these unjust territories to China. But once the Soviet Union grew stronger, it withdrew the promise, and most of the territory remained Russian. The Soviets also played a major role in China's internal politics. They helped build the Whampoa Academy and trained both nationalists and communists, but at the same time forced the nationalists to let communists into their party. When the communists wanted to leave the alliance, the Soviets stopped them, leading to the Shanghai Massacre, where thousands of communists were killed. Later, when the Manchurian warlord Jiang Shuiliang attempted to reclaim Russian-controlled railways on Chinese territory, the Soviet Union responded by sending over 100,000 soldiers, tanks, and aircraft. In the 1930s, Stalin feared a two-front war against Germany in the west and Japan in the east. He therefore pushed for a united Chinese front against Japan, only to leave China to bear nearly the entire burden alone. Stalin even signed a non-aggression pact with Japan. For the Soviets, it was ideal. China bled, Japan was tied down, and Moscow did not have to sacrifice much. When the Soviet Union finally entered the war against Japan in 1945, only during the last few weeks, it quickly seized Manchuria and stripped the region of its industrial base. Between 80 to 86% of the factory equipment was shipped to the Soviet Union, along with 640,000 Japanese prisoners of war used as forced labor. Despite China having fought Japan for 15 years, It was the Soviet Union that took the reparations and most of the spoils. At the Yalta Conference, Stalin ensured that yet another large territory slipped from Chinese control, Outer Mongolia. Together with the earlier land losses, this became one of the greatest territorial setbacks in China's modern history. And in the middle of China's civil war, Stalin attempted to stop Mao at the Yangtze River, most likely to keep China divided and weaker. During the Korean War, the pattern continued. After China intervened, the front settled into a bloody stalemate. Stalin realized this was a low-risk, high-reward situation for him. The U.S. was bleeding in Korea, China was bleeding even more, and the Soviet Union avoided direct confrontation while binding China to itself through dependence. All of this makes the later Sino-Soviet split seem almost inevitable in hindsight. Mao eventually realized that the Soviets did not want a strong China. The conflict erupted into open hostility, ideological rivalry, and even border clashes in which the Soviets asked the United States whether it would be acceptable to strike Chinese nuclear sites. Today's alliance between Russia and China is likely far more fragile than it is sometimes portrayed. They lie on opposite ends of their historical empires, have different goals, and carry a long history of mistrust and strategic contradictions. China's economy and population are vastly larger, and Putin's ineffective war in Ukraine risks leaving Siberia more exposed to long-term Chinese influence or even reclamation. Even though they participate in several international organizations, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, aimed largely against the West and the United States, their relationship is not built on deep trust, but on temporary converging interests. History shows that Russia has often benefited from keeping China weak, while China has learned to be cautious regarding Russian promises. What happens next depends on contemporary politics, but their shared history is far more conflict-ridden than most people know. And China, one could argue, has several unresolved issues regarding the enormous territories Russia has taken over the past 150 years. The West, for its part, has returned all its colonial conquests. The war in Ukraine may give Russia some land in Ukraine, but it risks losing immense territories previously taken from China. That Russia will become a long-term Chinese vassal seems fairly clear. They will be entirely dependent on Chinese technology even after the dust settles in Ukraine. And when that happens, China's modern army will be looking across the border at Chinese lands held by Russia's decimated 1970s-era army. China doesn't need to start a war only to reciprocate the Russian friendliness. Of course, we'll help you. You just need to hand over territories roughly the size of half the United States. And by the way, Chinese people already live there, and you've argued it's important where Russians live in Europe. So hand it over, serf. That concludes the first chapter of A Dark Dawn. The uneasy story of Russia and China is far from over, and in many ways it is only beginning. Their past reveals patterns, and those patterns still echo across today's shifting global landscape. If you found this episode insightful, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps the podcast grow, and it ensures you won't miss the next episode as we explore the fractures shaping our world. Thank you for listening.